Theist Fails Atheist Challenge by TMM. We've been looking a little bit at TMM's channel recently, the Messianic Manic. If that's true, that's kind of like an antichrist. Not the antichrist, but that's sort of what he's portraying himself as. If that's his name. That's what I'm told it is. Let's start.
Here's a guy who thinks he can beat a challenge from atheists, but thoroughly fails to do so.
I was challenged by my friend Tim Barnett from the YouTube channel Red Pin Logic to answer in 3 minutes or less 10 atheist objections to belief in God. In fact, this comes from a YouTube comment from an atheist named Brian Doyle, who says that this is 10 ways to prove that a God does not exist. You know it's an atheist because he puts God in lowercase g unnecessarily, just to get you.
You only capitalize the word God when using it as a proper noun. You don't capitalize it when you're simply using it as a regular noun. Since that guy was talking about a God rather than any
Normally, Christians will just capitalize whenever they have God, if they're referring to the God. And a lot of atheists will uncapitalize it, even if it's not grammarly correct, as I believe the other guy is right here. I don't personally put God in a capital form if I'm referring to a God, because I'm not referring to my God versus somebody else. If I'm referring to my God, then I oftentimes will capitalize it. But if I refer to a God, you know, proof of a God, then, I mean, you could be talking about Thor or Odin or, you know, any of these guys.
Is because he puts God in lowercase g unnecessarily, just to get you.
You only capitalize the word God when using it as a proper noun. You don't capitalize it when you're simply using it as a regular noun. Since that guy was talking about a God rather than any particular God, he was clearly not using it as a proper noun. Mike's being a little oversensitive about a lowercase g if he's assuming that it was used out of spite.
So I accepted Tim's challenge to try to, in 3 minutes or less, do this. He's going to do it on his channel as well. Here's my attempt to diffuse the atheist in 3 minutes, 10 reasons that you would stop being a believer in God. Let's see if I can do this and keep us all from becoming atheists in the next 3 minutes. Because I'm pretty sure if I can't answer these things in 3 minutes or less, the atheist will blow up and we will all become atheists. And to read the objections, allow me to introduce my improvisational atheist friend, Mick. 10 ways to prove that a God does not exist. Let's get started. Number 1. The fact that a human being has to tell you about the existence of your God proves there is no God. We would be born with knowledge of its existence.
We might not be born with knowledge of his existence.
The Bible even says that we have an understanding of God. And the Bible says as well that the universe itself is proof of a God. Now, you might not be able to infer Jesus from that, which is why Jesus came here, to give more clarity. But the fact that you can look at the universe and be like, there's a creator. And I've already made a video on this, actually. Is there a God, I believe is the title, or something like that. Where I go and I try to figure out, is there or isn't there a God, just using science. Just using science and looking at the things around you, you can infer there's a creator. Without anybody else telling you.
But if he really wants us to believe in him, I don't think it's that unreasonable to expect him to show himself.
Babies aren't born knowing anything.
Strictly speaking, that's not true. There are things that we are born knowing. For example, we are born knowing to smile when we're happy. Even babies born blind do this, which shows that they didn't learn it from observation. There's also good evidence that we're born with a basic knowledge of the structure of language, and thus the ability to learn any language.
At all, how strange to suppose they will be born knowing about God. But research has shown that humans are predisposed to believe in supernatural agency.
There's evidence that we are predisposed to infer agency behind many events, but not supernatural agency. Agency is not supernatural.
Behind the world. God belief will crop up in humans unless indoctrination pushes it out. So by your own standard, Brian, this is actually evidence for God.
A predisposition to infer agency is not the same.
And I actually covered this in his last video, that we're born with the understanding of God, and we're born with this yearning to find God. And then we're given the universe and everything in physics to go and find him. So, yeah, it is right there. And then we have to teach it out of ourselves.
thing as a belief in any god, nor does it inevitably lead to belief in any god. When we infer that other people have agency, we're not inferring that they are gods. Similarly, if people infer that the weather or any other natural event is a product of agency, that is not the same thing as inferring the existence of an all-powerful god that created the universe. There are many cultures that do not infer the existence of a god, and it's not because the people in those cultures have been indoctrinated into atheism.
Number 2. A God belief is simply geography. Being raised in a religious home decides which God you believe in. What surprises me with this one is that it's based on an official logical fallacy called the genetic fallacy. Basically, you can't prove a belief wrong by criticizing where it came from, Richard Dawkins.
I think this rebuttal misses the point. When we point out that...
No, that perfectly gets the point. I think this TMM guy is it's pretty bad at rebutting all of this stuff because, I don't know, he fails in my opinion. He doesn't actually cover anything that's sound. I love how he used a quote from an atheist to try to prove his point, is the fact that just because somebody thought it up or somebody, it comes from a certain area, that does not discredit a belief. Not to mention that when it pops up in somebody's house, you can, always change your belief later. Many people go from atheists to Christians, Christians to atheists, Christians to Hindus, Hindus to Christians. People change their beliefs, and especially now that we have the internet, people can easily make up their own mind based off of what they find.
A person's religion happens to match the most common religion of the region in which they live, we are trying to point out that they likely believe what they do because that's what they were raised being taught, rather than because they carefully weighed the evidence for each belief system.
What's equally embarrassing for those who hold to number 2.
I will admit that some people do hold to that. Some people, my parents were this, so I'm this. And I would say those people, sometimes, aren't Christians. If they do that, when did you get saved? And they're like, well, my parents were saved, so I guess I always was. They're not grafted in quite like that. It doesn't work like that. And a lot of those people aren't Christians, and they just say they are. It's not for me to judge. I don't know who is and who isn't. My dad's a Christian, but I remember when I got saved. I specifically made the choice. And I can go into my testimony another time.
Is that by their own standard, their atheism is just a result of where they were born, and therefore they can't be trusted about atheism. So it's fallacious and self-refuting.
The rebuttal that a person's atheism is a product of their geography only really carries any weight if they happen to be raised in a largely atheist culture, or at least by an atheist family. Many atheists grew up in religious families and in largely religious communities. You can't say that those folks are atheists because their worldview is merely a product of their upbringing. It's actually...
That's my point. He's taking down his own argument. You can't have both. Atheists have become Christians. Christians have become atheists. If you want to say that, well, they can change, well, then you've just taken down the argument that they were raised in a certain household. He just contradicted himself.
A rejection of their upbringing.
Number 3. There was no time before the Big Bang, so that means that there was no time for a God to exist or create things in. Now, this objection actually...
That assumes a Big Bang is a thing, by the way.
touches on a powerful reason to believe in God. Since the universe is space, time, matter, and energy, then the thing that made the universe needs to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and incredibly powerful.
Yes, that's precisely why the entire idea of a creator of the universe is an incoherent notion. Not only can you not carry out the act of creation, or any act at all, without time and space already existing in which to do so.
And this is when he puts God in a box. So many atheists put God in a box. I keep trying to remind them that God is not in a box. If God is outside time, space, and matter, then he does not need any of these things. And they just don't understand because they're trapped in these puny boxes.
Oh, you cannot coherently be said to exist without time or space, because to exist at all, one needs to exist at some time and in some place. If you don't exist anywhere or at any time, then you don't exist at all. Also, since the universe always existed, in the sense that there was never a time or place in which there was no universe, the universe therefore needs no cause. Causes are only necessary for things whose existence is preceded by a time in which they did not exist. Things that have existed throughout all time, even if time itself is finite in the past, do not need a cause, and in fact cannot have a cause. You can't create something that already exists, and there was never a time when the universe did not already exist.
The timeless nature of the...
That is a bunch of jumble to say the universe is, therefore it always was, therefore it must be. Or pretty much, because it exists, it made itself. You see, once you sort of simplify it, you start to realize, wait a minute, this is 0 equals 1. That doesn't work. When will, like, he must have not studied his math at all, because that's how math works. 0 cannot equal 1, and he just tried to say it does.
Origin of all things is another piece of evidence for God.
Exactly the opposite. No entity can exist without existing for some time, or at least at some time. To say that the creator of the universe needs to exist without time is effectively to say that it isn't possible or even coherent for the universe to have a creator.
Number 4. The Abrahamic God cannot exist because it wasn't the first God to be created. There are other gods that have been proclaimed to exist before this God. They can't all be true, so if we can deny the existence of one of these gods, we can use the same method to deny them all.
Other than the real one.
This one is seriously confused. It assumes that God was created when Abraham existed, but that assumes atheism to prove atheism.
See, they say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it wasn't that way. See, God was there with Adam, okay? We just needed a way to explain who God was, and we didn't have a name for him. Now we call him Jesus, and there's many other names, but back then they'd say, whose God are you? Well, the God of Abraham, because a lot of people knew Abraham. Then they'd say, well, the God of Abraham and Isaac. Then they said the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just like they said Jesus of Nazareth. They didn't have last names, really. So, Jesus. Well, who? Jesus who? Jesus was like John back then. There were a lot of them. Jesus who? Jesus from Nazareth.
And it says that if all gods aren't real, then no God is real. That's like saying fake Van Goghs prove there are no real Van Goghs.
I think this misses the point of the argument. The argument doesn't assume atheism. Rather, it points out that there was a time when people had no concept of Yahweh, and then the concept of Yahweh appeared. As you would...
The concept of Yahweh appeared with Adam, not Abraham.
Expected to if it had simply been invented. If Yahweh has always existed, and the first humans knew about him, as Genesis tells us they did, then you would expect that people would have always had knowledge of Yahweh. This does not look to be the case. This fact is far more consistent with the idea that Yahweh was invented rather than something about which we had knowledge from the beginning of time.
Number 5. God either allows the
Seriously, read Genesis.
devil to exist and is an accomplice, or it isn't an all-powerful God. An all-powerful and loving God wouldn't allow the devil to exist. Isaiah 45 verse 7, King James Version. Many reasonable explanations have been offered as to why God allows evil, and if they are even possibly true, then this objection fails, and that's why no scholars today promote this objection.
Is Bart Ehrman not a scholar? He says that the problem of evil is the reason why he is no longer a Christian. Also, if there are reasonable explanations as to why God allows evil, I haven't heard them. The most common explanation I hear from apologists is that God has sufficient reasons to allow evil. But the only way any reason could be sufficient to allow evil would be if A, there is some end that is so good that it makes up for the evil, and also B, that end cannot be achieved without allowing that evil. To say that God has sufficient reason to allow evil is effectively to say that this supposedly all-powerful being does not have the power to achieve his ends without allowing evil.
Here's how it works, okay? God put Adam in the garden. God, being a loving God, did what love does best. Gave free will, freedom. Without freedom, it's not love. It's a prison. So to keep Adam from being in a prison, he gave Adam a choice. Choose to obey me, choose to not obey me. There was only one way to disobey God. And that was the fruit in the garden. Well, the one tree of knowledge of good and evil. Everything else he could have done was going to be good. That one was bad. And Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. God, knowing this, had a backup plan. But see, the thing is, to create a human that is possible to rebel pretty much means that human will rebel. It's what we do best. It's not God's fault at all. Now, why does he tolerate the devil? God is love. God gives everybody a chance. God has given the devil many chances. The devil decided to rebel anyways. That's just how it is. Don't ask me why the devil does what the devil does. But God, being a God of love, gives his subjects a choice. That is why. Now you can go on to, oh, well, he has plans for furthering this and that and the other thing, but this is the simplistic version of why God allows any evil, not to mention the devil.
That's an obvious contradiction.
Number 6. The God of the Bible is jealous of other gods. This proves that this God is not the only one. With multiple choices only shows that there is no reason to choose just one. If a God were true, there would be no other options. I don't even know where to begin with this one. First, if you're taking the Bible as true, which this objection depends on, then you realize that these other gods are at worst fake or at best demons and lesser spiritual beings.
Then why are they called gods? If they are fake gods, then why wouldn't the Bible explicitly say that they are fake gods rather than simply calling them gods?
A god is whatever you make into a god. For example, people make money into their god all the time. Some people make video games their god. It's whatever you love the most. That becomes your god. Some people make their spouse or children their god. God has a definition, sort of like this thing that you worship, this thing that you put all your time into.
That seems unnecessarily confusing. This is yet another example of the supposedly perfect and fallible Word of God, sounding as though it was written by someone with the communication skills of a jar of hemorrhoid-flavored marmalade. But in reality, the reason why the Bible says that Yahweh is jealous of people worshiping other gods...
Thankfully, he writes it all down, so I'm able to read this. Someone with the communication skills of a jar of hemorrhoid-flavored marmalade. I guess what he's trying to say is that there are no communication skills, but I'm pretty sure that he failed to communicate that well. The Bible has great communication skills. However, people like you decide to not pay attention to reality and will go into whatever you can to believe otherwise. As someone I knew said, it is amazing what someone will believe to stay in their unbelief. And that's exactly what this guy's doing. He's listening to every possible excuse other than the Bible.
Is because the religion of the Israelites began as a henotheist religion and not a monotheist religion.
Ontologically nothing like God Almighty. And number 2, on God's jealousy, since the worship of false gods requires people to treat those gods as if they're real by sacrificing to false gods, going to temples, doing sexual rituals, God can be jealous for those people with or without those gods being real.
Jealousy seems to me to be a product of insecurity. It's weird that a perfect being would feel insecure. It would be extra weird for a perfect being to be jealous of other gods, especially if those other gods were fictional. It's like if you were to get jealous of your wife because she has fantasies about Mr. Darcy.
Number 3, you're literally taking a warning passage about worshiping false gods and using it as an excuse to reject the true God.
The passage says nothing about false gods. The first commandment doesn't prohibit the worship of false gods. It prohibits prioritizing other gods ahead of Yahweh. It makes no...
Which is what I pointed out, is a god is whatever you make into a god. It's whatever you decide to worship.
mention of other gods being false.
Number 7. There is no evidence that spirit energy exists. So we can conclude that psychics, ghosts, and gods are non-existent. Otherwise, God has nothing to be made of. Christianity does not...
I'm going to answer this before he does. Just because we can't register right now doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, people couldn't see microscopic organisms for the longest time. Well, then they don't exist. People couldn't see x-rays. Therefore, they don't exist. To only believe in what you can see is a really stupid way to go about life. You have to go and do your research and take the time to actually look into a lot of these things and realize there are things you can't see that are very much so real.
Depend on the existence of spiritual energy any more than it depends on the existence of Santa's flying sleigh.
The idea of God depends on the existence of the non-physical. I suspect that this is what is meant by spiritual energy. Unless you think that God is made out of matter or physical energy, you believe that the nature of his existence is something non-physical.
God isn't made of something that is part of creation. If he was, it would actually be a good reason to reject belief in God in the Christian sense.
That's exactly the point. The question clearly used the term spiritual energy to refer to a substance that is not part of what you would call creation.
Number 8. There is no such thing as nothing. For nothing to exist would cause it to be something. Creationists believe that God created the universe out of literally nothing. Oh my.
How's that even an argument? Nothing is nothing. 0 equals 0. That's the evolutionist saying 0 equals 1 again. Do your math. 0 does not equal 1.
The only people I've actually heard say that nothing is something are atheists. Like, look at physicist Lawrence Krauss, who likes to promote that view.
But they refuse to accept the idea that nothing might be a physical quantity.
Krauss seems virtually alone on that assertion. I don't agree with his equivocation, and I've never seen any other atheist.
Look up the History Channel. It will say nothing. That will say like something came from this. Something can't come from nothing.
Who does agree. Also, the argument does not seem to assert that theists believe that nothing is something. Rather, it accepts the assertion often made by apologists that you can't get something from nothing. Since that's the case, creation ex nihilo is impossible.
But since we agree that nothing's really nothing, the universe appearing from nothing is powerful evidence for a transcendent creator God.
But the universe didn't appear from nothing. There never was nothing. In the 13.7 billion years that time has existed,
this is when he goes into a theory. This theory's never been proven. He's going to do a theory and acting like fact. I'm just warning you guys right now, 13 billion years, that's a lie. That's not a fact.
there has always been something. There was never a time when there was nothing. This should be obvious because it would be a contradiction for there to be a time in which time itself did not exist.
Number 9. This is not a finely tuned world created with us in mind. The sun gives you cancer, most of the water's undrinkable, and diseases run rampant. If there was an intelligent designer, there wouldn't be any mistakes. That's like saying that cars aren't fun.
There weren't any mistakes. We messed up the universe. God created the universe and said, it is perfect, it is good. And then Adam messed it up. Since then, the world has fallen into chaos. A flood happened, and there's a theory out there that there's an ice canopy and it broke down. I'm letting you guys know it's a theory. But that would have protected from something like the sun's deadly rays. Back then, before the flood, you would have had a lot of fresh water, and the water got saltier over time. All of these things happened. So, the world God created is not the world we have today. I mean, look, where is the Garden of Eden?
Tune driving machines because they can cause car accidents.
Well, it's more like saying that the fact that cars can cause car accidents and also just break down shows that they were not designed by an all-powerful, infallible creator. One would quite reasonably expect a car designed by such a designer to never break down, and we would also quite reasonably expect that a universe created by an all-powerful, infallible, and all-loving creator would be perfectly hospitable to any conscious entity placed into it.
Fine-tuning.
That's the way it was designed. We messed it up. You can't blame God for that.
Is present in the universe because the odds are astronomical that any intelligent life could exist without it being just the way it is.
This assumes that an all-powerful God does not have the power to place intelligent life into a universe with even slightly different parameters. In fact, if we lived in a universe in which our natural development was impossible, that would be far more compelling evidence that our existence was the product of some immensely powerful artificial cause. The fact that our
He believes in evolution, so I'm going to stop him right now and say that there is no proof of evolution. Macroevolution has no science to back it up. He says, well, if we lived in a universe where evolution wasn't possible, yeah, guess what? We do. He said, well, then that would be proof of God. Ta-da! That's exactly how it works.
Our existence is entirely consistent with the parameters of this universe shows that it could be entirely natural. Also, the mere fact that we can imagine the universe having vastly different constants and laws does not mean that those other constants and laws are possible, let alone equally probable. We therefore...
But that's what you guys imagine. You guys imagine evolution to be true, which has, like, way different constants and laws. It's not consistent with our universe at all.
Have no reason to infer that the laws and constants we observe are somehow wildly improbable.
But fine-tuning doesn't mean perfectly safe and without dangers.
It does if that fine-tuning is done by a God which is both all-loving and all-powerful.
Number 10. Evolution.
A God who is all-loving and all-powerful can do whatever he wants. And an all-loving, all-powerful God can do whatever he wants. So he can make a world that has adversity for some reason that we don't understand. An all-powerful God is way smarter than you and me. And because of that, we can't trap him in a little box and say, this is how God should work. Because he's bigger than that box. Like 1 billion times bigger than that box. Infinitely bigger than that box. So our tiny brains can't handle him. If it could, he wouldn't be worth worshiping. He wouldn't be worth worshiping.
Is obviously true. This means that we weren't created by magic and are somehow superior to the animal kingdom. No creator, no God. Evolution, if you do accept it, is just another reason to believe in God. If an explosion can make all this through natural processes, then it was an explosion that was very highly specialized and engineered by an intelligence that wanted this to happen.
As I said, people believe what they want to believe, and this guy has escaped all reality to hide in his box and say, well, God doesn't fit in my box, so I'm not going to have him. That's all I got for this video. Until next time, again, subscribing really helps this channel out, and if you want to see other people see this video and this channel grow, it's probably one of the best ways to do that. And commenting down below also really helps the algorithm, so go ahead and do that if you want.